recording.
Hey.
All right, ready? No. Click, there we go. Conflict, it's supposed to explode. You're supposed to see a big, beautiful explosion there, and it's not, and that's disappointing to me. All right, so chapter 8, conflict. They call it relational difficulties in the textbook, but let's be realistic. It's not relational difficulties, it's conflict. It's having problems with other people and so forth. This is, I think, one of the most interesting chapters that we talk about. It's definitely something that everyone can relate to because you're gonna have conflict every day. You're gonna have conflict with every person that you encounter. And in many cases, it's unavoidable. So I do want to take that opportunity to really emphasize that this is probably one of the most important chapters to all of our daily lives. So before I jump into it, just really quickly, you can text this, you can chat this, you can say it out loud. How would you rate yourself in terms of conflict? Are you good at conflict? Are you bad at conflict? Do you create the conflict? It's a safe space. How are you with conflict? Amanda's giving me a thumbs down. Yeah, me too. I find that I try to avoid it as much as possible. I go out of my way to avoid it as much as possible. And then I find myself in these situations where I can't avoid it. And I don't know, it gets ugly fast. And then I feel like all sorts of, like, I am not someone who deals with anxiety. My husband does very much, so I'm very familiar with it. But like, that's when I'll feel the most anxious, is when now I have to deal with that conflict that I've been trying to avoid forever. So not healthy in that sense. What else? How else do you deal with conflict? Or how well, I should say. Nobody wants to share it.
Wait, say again, Professor Sweeter?
How well do you deal with conflict?
I'll take that one. It depends on the conflict. But I think I'm a so-so conflict dealer, honestly. But then again, I sometimes explode.
And I think you said something without saying it. I think it's contextual too. There's some people that I want a conflict with, or I don't want a conflict with them, but I can handle a conflict with them. There are other people that, no way, I do not want to get into a conflict.
So I'm gonna give you a perfect example. So
sure.
This happened a couple of days ago, but my cousin is still like dwelling on it. And for me, I passed it. I told you how I felt. You speak to me. I love her to death. You speak to me. You don't speak to me. At this point, I really don't care. So I had asked her to do something for me, okay? And, she was like, okay, no problem. I will do it. So I'm sitting here actually waiting for her to do what she had to do. At the same time, she had her own stuff to deal with. They were heading out to New York, and so what I asked her, I was sitting here waiting for the whatever I asked her to be done, and it wasn't done. So finally I called her and I'm like, what happened? Like, dude, I sat here all day, what happened? Where are you? And I'm on my way to New York. I can't talk on the phone right now, and hangs up the phone. I'm driving. So I hung up the phone because at this point I was pissed. If you couldn't do it, I would have did it myself. The day is gone and now I can't I have to wait till the next day. Yeah. So I hung up the phone, because I'm pissed and I didn't want to argue with her. So she texts me and says to me, that was uncalled for. There was no need for you to hang up on me like that. And in my head, I'm thinking like, you just said to me, you're driving right now, you can't talk. That's one. Yeah. So I hung up. But now you felt a certain way because I hung up.
Yeah.
So
after you let me hang all day.
Okay, so I texted her and I said, well, you're driving. That was one of the reasons. You said you were driving, you can't talk right now. That was one of the reasons I hung up. First, that was one. Second of all, if you couldn't do it, You should have told me. I would have done it myself. Now the day is gone. I really needed this done. Now I have to wait to the next day to do it. That's 2.
Mm-hmm.
And 3, you could have given me the, like, again, I'm going to repeat the courtesy of saying,
Yep.
listen, hey, baby, I couldn't do it. We had to rush. I didn't get to do it. Give me the courtesy. You never gave me that courtesy. So I told her how I felt. I expressed my thing. So now she has like a whole attitude. Like, mind you, we're really close. We talk pretty much every day. So now she's just like, I don't hear from her. If I don't call her, I don't hear from her. But I'm the type of person, I'm not gonna go and kiss your butt for something that you've done. And then I have to feel bad because I express how I felt.
So with your story, Arlise, that's actually a perfect segue, because there's 2 things that you've really highlighted there for us. First of all, a lot of times that conflict comes from misunderstanding, like complete misunderstanding. You thought one thing, she thought another thing, right? And then even more in your case here, it sounds like it's just miscommunication somewhere. And I'm not putting blame on you or her.
No, do you know I told her that? Communication is the key. If you had communicated to me earlier, listen, I may not get the chance to do this. You might have to do it yourself. That would have been different. Even when I called you and said, are you going to be able to do this? You're like, yeah, no problem. I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I said that to her. Communication. You felt to communicate with me that you couldn't do it.
And then she could very easily say, but you didn't communicate to me how important it is too. And again, you're not wrong. She's not wrong.
Well, no, she couldn't say that,
Professor
Suda, because she knew how important it was for me to get it. Yeah.
Sure.
So so like it's to her, she's still stewing on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, look, I don't have time. I express how I felt. You like it. You like it. You don't like it. You keep moving. It's on you. But I'm not gonna sit here and let this simmer in my head because you haven't.
I get it.
Yeah,
no. A conflict, essentially, you've hit the nail on the head. It's that breakdown in communication. It's that miscommunication, that misunderstanding. You know, where your cousin's holding on to it a little bit more, that might be more like her culture and what's motivating her, but the root of it is just that complete breakdown in communication. So what we're looking at here, first of all, that disclaimer, I want you to realize that conflict is normal and it's healthy. It doesn't mean it's fun. It doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we want conflict, but it is normal and healthy. Think about those, and we're talking about romance next week, but think about those romantic relationships where people say, oh, we never fight. We never fight. We've never gotten in a fight in our entire relationship. And I hope you're rolling your eyes at that because it's garbage. It's complete garbage. You're going to get into conflicts with someone you're in a relationship with, especially a romantic relationship. So please remember that conflict is just a normal part of healthy relationships. And the desire to avoid conflict completely doesn't work. Courtney, go for it.
I mean, I can't avoid mine. Obviously, I'm married to my husband, and he and I see eye to eye just about on everything, except for I used to have like such a rough exterior, and since having children, that has softened a lot. Like I don't have nearly the exterior I used to have, and I find I'm more compassionate and stuff like that, especially after my diagnosis and stuff like that, to where my husband would cut you off if like the smallest little things. It's like, well, try to see it like this or something, or you know what I mean? Like I try to have him see a different side of it and stuff like that. But there are just some things to where he and I'm just like, we're not gonna agree on this. That's okay, because we're still different people. And I still love you more than anything on this planet, but we don't have to agree on this at all.
We don't have to fight to the death every time.
Exactly.
No, absolutely. Well said.
I was also going to say fish sticks.
I was smart. We went to BJ's this morning. I got a rotisserie chicken. So eventually he'll feed her that. All right. So yeah, relationships where people have conflict and most importantly, resolve that conflict. That's normal. It's healthy. Relationships without conflict are not healthy. And like I said, most of us don't like conflict. There are people out there. There are some weird people out there who do like conflict. They thrive on conflict. And I don't want to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but consider when you encounter those people who thrive on conflict, are they helping the situation? Are they making it more difficult? Are they creating conflict because they're trying to hide some other aspect of their lives? I don't know. For years and years, my husband and I, we've been together since 2003. So 18 years now, I think that is. And for the longest time, I thought he could just be, frankly, a rat bastard, because he would get so angry and start fights. And what we realized maybe 14 years into our relationship is no, he has really significant anxiety disorder. And so getting angry and starting conflict and starting fights was not him trying to start fights. It was him trying to somehow wrestle with that anxiety that he didn't have a word for. And so in that case, conflict was actually indicative of something like a bigger issue, a larger issue. Arlise, go ahead. I saw your hand there. And then Amber.
It was one of the things that you posted right here. It says relationship that has no conflicts are not healthy.
Mhm.
So the comment was that what I was going to make was that some people are so laid back that they don't realize what you not giving that feedback causes that conflict.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, where
Just
the
give
other
me an
person,
answer.
yeah, when the other person in the relationship is like, it's like, whatever, you win, but the other person will be like, I'm sick and tired of you not, like, it will create
Yes.
friction
Yeah.
because there's no emotions, there's no thought, there's
No
nothing.
buy-in. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point. What do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't care. No, really, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I
Yeah,
don't care.
like,
But at some point you need to
exactly.
come to that agreement. Yeah.
Expressing
absolutely.
yourself. Yeah.
Mhm. And there's also potential there for getting walked on. You know, you don't want to be taken advantage of because people see you as someone who's just not going to fight back.
Nobody likes a doormat.
Yeah, especially in a professional situation. I mean, granted, you know, career-wise, you have to balance that carefully and make sure that you're not causing too many, you know, waves, but still, you have to balance that and be able to give some conflict too. Amber, go ahead.
I was just gonna say my dad's the same way as your husband.
Yeah.
But
it's frustrating.
he's also taking medication now. I don't know if your husband does the same thing. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
I see a huge difference.
I was about to say, Professor Sweeter, like, how do you deal with that? Like, to avoid that, as much as it bothers you, does that create a conflict for you?
Well, let's think about that. Actually, we've been together 18 years, right? And in that time, people change and they grow. And so I can see over the years, I might have been a more laid back, more like subservient person. And quite honestly, dealing with him and the fact that he would get so angry and reactive gave me a thicker skin. And so now I'm actually better at advocating for myself and dealing with conflict, whereas before I didn't want to. Trial by fire, certainly, you know, it's a hard way to learn to be more proactive and to be more defensive when you need to be. But it's not a bad thing. So, you know, over the years, I was like, cut your crap, you know, this is what's really going on.
You've come to the point where, like, you choose the battle, you choose the fight
Yeah.
that you want to have, and some of them is just not worth it.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So the video activity, has anyone previewed this yet? This one is brutal. It's two people at a bus stop. If we have time tonight, it's 7:30. If we have time tonight, we will.
I did the couple.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep. It's two people, they're arguing at a bus stop with everyone can see them. And it's a conflict where they're arguing about some personal stuff. But it gets pretty brutal. So if we have time tonight, we will preview it together so you can see it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the problem with conflict is some conflict is healthy. And then you get to the conflict in this situation, which is not healthy. And it gets pretty violent and angry and mean, essentially. So we'll come back to that. But I want to think about that. First of all, I want you to consider the fact that we've got relational rules. All right. Relational rules are super important when you talk about being in a relationship with someone else. These are things where there are expectations, there are things that need to happen within a relationship to keep it healthy and strong. And so in that context, there are two different types of relational rules. First of all, you're going to have explicit rules, and those are the ones that are stated like outright. I hate it when my husband touches my feet. So it's like, don't touch my feet, right? And that's explicit. That's a silly example, but that's something that I've said outright, you are not allowed to do this because I will kick you. No holds barred, right? And then there's implicit rules that are agreed upon, but you don't necessarily have to have that conversation between. For example, don't cheat on me, right? In most relationships, that's a pretty clear-cut rule. People know we're in a relationship, we are committed, so I'm not going to cheat on you, you're not going to cheat on me. But that's not necessarily something that you sit down and you talk about because, again, it's implied. Now that we're in a relationship, and this is what a relationship looks like, we're going to assume that I know that I'm not going to cheat on you and you're not going to cheat on me. All right. So these rules are super, super important with relationships. And what happens is when those rules are broken or violated, that's going to lead that conflict. Okay. Yeah. My husband touches my feet. I'm going to get mad. I'm probably going to kick him, mostly because it's an involuntary reaction at this point. Is it a big deal? Probably not. He might be mad that I kicked him. If I find out that he's cheated on me, or he finds out that I've cheated on him, bigger deal, bigger conflict. All right. So I just want you to understand the difference between those. Can you give me, I've given you some silly examples there, but can you give me other examples of explicit or implicit rules that you have in relationships?
Well, implicit, obviously, don't let anything happen to my children.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
They
hey.
come first. I will kill you first.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Yes, I will. And I'll do it with a smile on my face. Yes, I will.
That's a great one. Yeah. Any others?
Implicit would be more like I don't eat peppers, so don't cook with them, something like that, right? Or the explicit.
That's more explicit. Yep. Absolutely.
You know, like that was my, now hearing it, I had it was hard for me to try to differentiate between explicit and implicit. So now that I hear it, how everybody would,
Yeah.
how everybody's describing it, I have a better understanding of it now. Because I was like,
think
go ahead.
explicit, like explained. Like the word explain is the same, EXPL. And think implicit, like implied.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So something I have to explain. I have to explain my feet are sensitive, don't touch them. Christina doesn't like peppers, don't cook them, you know. Oh, you're muted, Arlise.
Pretty much saying I have dreadlocks, and I don't like people touching my hair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great example of an explicit rule. Don't touch my hair.
Don't touch my hair. Like I've, you know, my kids knows this, you know, when it's my kids, it's totally different. But someone that I know that I don't know, and it's happened to me so many times, and it's like, and it's happened to people that knows me, that know that I don't like that. And it's like, didn't I tell you not to touch my hair? Like, don't do that. Yeah. So, okay,
and
now I get it.
Implicit's going to be something like, you know, don't badmouth me to my family members, or don't talk about me behind my back, or, you know, be respectful of me. Those are other ones. And then as it says there, transgressions, you know, where someone violates whether an explicit rule or an implicit rule, super contextual. Okay, some of you might like foot rubs. I happen to like peppers, right? Highly contextual, but that's what's going to lead to that conflict between them. All right, couple different types of conflicts. First is communicative aggression. So this is a way of communicating aggression to someone else. And I'm going to go through this list pretty quickly because I'm sure that you've experienced them or you've heard of them in some ways, but these are really, really common ways to be aggressive from one person to another. Verbal aggression is obvious: yelling, using a loud tone. Humiliation is making someone feel inferior. Isolation might be keeping someone from other people. Withdrawal might be when if you're the aggressor, where you stop talking to your partner or stop talking to the person you're in a relationship with. Name calling is pretty obvious. Dominance, I think, is pretty obvious, where one person is dominant over another one. Freedom restriction, maybe you take away someone's ability to work or someone's ability to drive a car. You're holding on to things that are going to give them the opportunity to get out and get about. And then finally, insecurity induction is where you make veiled threats and say, you know, well, what if you don't see your kids anymore? Or what if this happens and you have to deal with it, that sort of thing. So these are just some different types of communicative aggression. I think all of us have experienced different forms of them in different contexts, and we don't need to explore that right now. But I want you to think about, again, TV and movies are such great examples, especially when we're talking about communication, because you see this stuff. You know, think about a movie with a bad relationship. Think about a movie where you've got one person who's being really aggressive on the other person, and you probably see stuff like this. You probably see examples exactly like on this list as types of aggression there. All right. Here's another one that's really interesting, that's been more popular in the past 10 years, gaslighting. Is anyone familiar with this one? I feel like we hear the term a lot, but we don't necessarily understand it, or it's something that's not as well recognized. So gaslighting is actually been around for a long time, but the language is relatively new. This is where if you're in a relationship with someone, doesn't have to be romantic. It can be like a professional relationship or family relationship. But this is where someone undermines your perception of reality. So you start questioning, you know, am I crazy? Am I right? Are the things that I remember, the things that I think accurate, or maybe I'm the bad person? I don't know. That those kind of conversations with yourself are examples of gaslighting. As we're talking about movies, if you have seen Tangled, that was the Disney movie about Rapunzel. I see a couple people nodding. Mother Gothel is essentially the evil witch in that movie, and she's locked Rapunzel up in the tower. And I really encourage you to take some time and go back and either watch the movie, or maybe I'll share the video with you later on. There's that one song that she sings called Mother Knows Best. It's this whole scene where she's talking to Rapunzel and saying, you're crazy and you're small and you're weak and you're not smart enough and you need to stay in this tower because I'm protecting you from all the horrible things that are outside. And it's just a perfect example of gaslighting. It's an interesting Disney princess movie. I don't think it's one of the more popular ones, but when you really look at it from like a psychological point of view, it's one of the darker ones, really. Okay.
So it's like feeding, kind of like feeding their insecurity.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. I'm writing that down. I like that. Feeding insecurity. It is. It is. Just for some context, the origins come from a movie from the late 30s with Ingrid Bergman. And essentially she's living with this husband who he does exactly that. He says, oh, you're crazy, or you know, no one loves you, or, you know, you cannot take care of yourself and you need me to take care of you for you. And it's called gaslighting because the movie is called Gaslight. And in this particular film, it's an older film, as a visual cue, every time he was saying horrible things to her, the lights in the house would flicker. And so she began to think that, you know, the lights are flickering. I'm having some sort of crazy spell. I'm losing my mind because the lights are flickering. And that's where the actual term gaslighting comes from. So just interesting tidbit. Some clips there that we're not going to go over too much, but gaslighting tactics. These are things that people who gaslight you do. They tell lies, like blatant lies, obvious lies. Their actions do not match their words. So they'll say, I love you. I'm doing this to protect you. I'm doing this because I want what's best for you, but I'm going to lock you up in this tower, Rapunzel, right? They'll deflect blame. They'll say that they never said something, you're not remembering it correctly, or I wasn't the one who did that, or your actions made me behave that way. And then they shift that blame to you. So you're suddenly the one responsible for whatever horrible things you haven't actually done. They minimize your thoughts and feelings. So, you know, if you're feeling concerned about something or you're worried about something, oh, don't be silly. Don't worry about it. You're crazy. Like comments like that. Okay.
I kind of
Number
like the
6.
way the wording of manipulation. In other words, it's a
Yeah,
form of manipulation.
it
But I kind of
absolutely
like the
is.
wording of gaslighting because, wow.
Yep. It absolutely is. Absolutely. 6 is a mean one. This is really hard. They use what is important to you as ammunition. They turn your kids against you, turn your pets against you, your career, you know, you're only in that job because they felt badly for you, or, you know, your family only loves you because they have to love you. It's just horrible, horrible things like that. But then they'll use compassionate words and say, you know, I love you. And I'm telling you the truth because I love you. And that's confusing. They project their negative qualities on you. And then they try to get other people against you. So they'll tell other people that you're nuts, or that you're a bad person, or you're a bad father, or whatever it is. They'll tell other people that you're crazy. They'll tell everyone else that, or they'll tell you that everyone else is lying to you. So just a lot of horrible, horrible tactics. And again, think about different movies, think about situations, TV shows, the drama that you see. A lot of times they follow exactly this list, right? All right. Here's the weird thing about gaslighting, though. It happens over time. It's not something that happens right away. And again, I go back to Rapunzel or Tangled, because it's such a good example. It happens over time. When you're watching the movie, she's 16 years old. It's her 16th birthday. And only now is she realizing, hey, wait a minute, something's not right. Something's wrong. And then what happens in the movie is she gets out of her tower and she goes through this period. It's like a 5-minute montage where she's like, I'm free. This is amazing. Oh my God, what have I done? And she's going back and forth, really questioning her sanity and her reality. But it's taken years and years and years to get to that point. All right. The analogy I've given you here, frog in the frying pan. The idea is the frog is in the pan. There's water in the pan. And as the heat is turned up on the stove, the frog doesn't realize that things are getting hotter and more dangerous. And so it just stays in the water and never realizes that it's slowly being cooked to death. And gaslighting is just like that. All right. If you feel these feelings, you might be gaslighting, or being gaslit, I should say. Whoops, going back. Asking yourself questions like, am I too sensitive? If you feel confused or you find yourself apologizing a lot, if you are wondering, you know, why you're not happy, this is someone who loves me, why do I feel so weird about it? Excuses, when you're making excuses for someone else, that sort of thing, you might realize gaslighting is happening to you. Just a feeling of something's wrong, but you don't know what's wrong. Making decisions and then wondering if you're good enough. So that kind of thing, those are things that'll indicate that you might be being gaslit. Arlise, go ahead.
So like, in other words, actually believing what someone is saying about you. Like they say it so much that you begin to like Maybe that
Yeah.
is true. Maybe that I am like,
Yep.
maybe this is my fault. You start to think that way.
Yeah. I'm going to show you, I'll send this to you afterwards. The Tangled clip so that you can see it, because exactly that. Why am I like this? Why am I so fearful? Why am I such an innocent person? The reality is this is a character who's none of those things. She's just been suppressed all this time. All right, so gaslit. Let's talk now about unhealthy conflict. When we talk about this is bad conflict, right? Gaslighting is bad conflict. It's manipulative. I hope you were never in that situation where you're being gaslit, especially for a long term. And I know it's possible, certainly, but I hope you're never that. That's one aspect. And then we talk about unhealthy conflict, and these are essentially relationship killers. If you ever find yourself in couples therapy, this is the kind of stuff that couples therapists talk about. All right, these are the things that kill a relationship dead, and it's very, very hard to come back from them. So there are 4 types of unhealthy conflict, and they're modeled after the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In the Bible, the idea is the world's going to end with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: famine, war, shoot, the other 2 went right
Greed,
out of plague,
greed,
yep,
and I think
famine,
envy.
war, and greed. Thank you. Yeah. So this image that you're looking at now is supposed to represent those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: plague, greed, famine, and war, right? So because they're supposed to be horrible, destructive characters that are going to end the world, the idea in communications and also in psychology, quite honestly, is there are 4 similarly evil things that will end a relationship. All right, here they are. These are the 4 things, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to relationships. Criticism. When you have one partner, again, doesn't have to be romantic. It can be a family relationship. It can be a friend relationship. It can be a work relationship. When you have one partner in the relationship who routinely criticizes the other person over and over and over again, you know, you're so stupid, you're so selfish, you're so ugly, you're so fat, whatever it is, that sort of criticism is going to kill a relationship over time. The second one is contempt, which is dislike or hate. When it is obvious to someone that you dislike them or you hate them, and you can't get past those feelings, the relationship is dead, right? That same thing. Arlene, do you want to say something? Go ahead.
Little share thing, guys. So
Sure.
was in this relationship for years. And to me, it's like, I love the person more than they love me. And I stayed in the relationship, but what I realized staying in it destroyed me. It destroyed my self-esteem.
Yeah.
It destroyed everything. It made me believe that I was a certain way that I'm not. And
Yep.
having children with that person was what made it worse. I
Mhm.
stayed at a point in time for my children. And then at a point in time, it was like, I can't take this. This is not me. So I left everything and just started anew and went into counseling for myself to try to get back what I lost within that relationship, which was my self-esteem.
Absolutely. And we said that last week. We all strongly support counseling.
Yeah.
The next one is defensiveness. And that's like just the opportunity to argue and be defensive about anything. If I need to talk to you about anything, suddenly there's a comment, suddenly you're defensive, and we can't have a conversation because we're too busy fighting or taking responsibility or really getting to the meat of the problem. So that's another thing, because you're not really communicating at that point, you're being too defensive. And then stonewalling is another kind of communication breakdown where you just stop talking to each other. And sometimes I think we see like a relationship where people just, they can't come together and they can't resolve it. A lot of times it's this: I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to interact with you. I want nothing to do with you. And that's that stonewalling where you just stop interacting altogether. So the idea behind these 4 principles is, if one or more of these is happening in that relationship is dead. and it's highly likely that it will not survive moving forward. When you watch this week's video thing, again, it's two people. It's not clear if they're married or not, but it's two people in a romantic relationship, a man and a woman, and they're arguing over his mother coming to live with them. And I want you to pay attention to one of the two partners is especially vicious and uses all of these in one way or another. And so you can see, as you're looking at that particular relationship, you can see just there's contempt, there's that defensiveness, here's that criticism. You see it all.
I think in that video, Professor Sweeter, if that was me, like some of the stuff that was said for me would have been like physical conflict at that point in time.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. It would take a few minutes to get it loaded on my computer, so I'm not going to preview it right now, guys. But when you see it, when you watch the video, you're going to see one of these partners is monstrous. There's just no other way to put it. One of these partners is just an awful, awful person. All right. 5 patterns of conflict management. Now, when we talk about conflicts, there are different ways to resolve conflict. And you have another homework assignment where you're going to choose a conflict and try to resolve it. You're going to look at different ways to resolve the conflict. You've got some ways that have a high concern for the person that you're trying to resolve conflict with, and other ways that don't have a lot of concern for that person. And then you've got ways that have a high concern for yourself, and then ways that have not a lot of concern for yourself. And then there's a fifth that kind of balances them all. So the idea is, when you are when you're in conflict with someone, you have one of 5 different ways that you can solve it. You can collaborate, you can compete, you can accommodate, you can avoid, you can compromise. And so you're going to have a homework assignment. I'll go back to it in a little bit, where you're going to choose a conflict, you'll describe a conflict, and then you'll go through each of these different steps. What would it look like if you collaborated with this person? What would it look like if you competed with this person? And so on. And then of those 5, which one works the best? Okay, so let's just take a second and discuss all of these. And I want to make it clear, there is not one of these that is better than another. There's not one of these that is always the right answer. That's highly contextual. There are some instances where it's not going to work. There's some instances where collaboration is not going to work, or compromise isn't going to work. It's just going to be a problem. Let me give you an example. My first job teaching, I was in Windsor at Sage Park Middle, and I had, this person's no longer there, so I'm comfortable saying this, I had the world's worst vice principal. And so someone who made my life miserable and would come in and try to intimidate me in front of my peers and in front of my students. And part of the job of the vice principal is to evaluate new teachers. And this person would evaluate me and fail me regularly, like every few months. Here's an evaluation. Now I'm going to fail you. And that goes into the file, the employee file. In that situation, I was about 24 years old, and this person had about 20 years on me. And I had to really think about, here's a conflict I'm having with someone who's a supervisor. What can I do here? It was really hard for me to collaborate with this person because they wouldn't collaborate with me. I certainly couldn't compete with them, right? I'm in the middle of a job that I need. I'm a new professional. I cannot get into a fight with this person. Accommodating this person, in some instances, that was the way to do it, right? Most cases, I went out of my way to avoid this person because that was the best way of dealing with that conflict, and knowing that I wouldn't have to deal with that person forever. And again, compromise. If collaboration wasn't going to work, compromise wasn't going to work.
You want to
So
know
in
something, Professor Sweeter? Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off.
Sure.
Avoidance becomes the worst part of that when you're dealing in that work environment,
Mhm.
because that takes such a toll on you, where you don't
does.
like, you become physically sick. Like when you
It
go
did.
into work, yeah, like you just like, I'm to the point where you just like, I'm done. I don't want this
Mhm.
job. I'm quitting. Yeah, sometimes
Mhm.
avoidance doesn't work well at all.
Yep. And you're right. You're right. And here's the deal. I survived 3 years in that position under that same person. And then eventually they didn't renew my contract and I found a better job at another school, and that was beautiful. But avoiding that conflict for 3 years is what kept me sane and like kept me in that position for 3 years. If I had competed with this person, I would have been out within 6 months, right? So again, it's contextual. You have to really think about that conflict and what's going to work best in that case. So I'm just going to go into Blackboard for just a second. I'm not sure if you're looking at the PowerPoint. I think you are. Let's go here for a second. In Blackboard, and let me move things around so you can see it, because this is relevant. This is one of the assignments that you're going to be looking at. Chapter 10. Managing conflict, right here. This is the one. You are going to be considering a conflict that you've experienced or one that you know, can be movies or friends or just a hypothetical situation. And you're going to, where's a template? Oh no, I guess there's a template for this one. I can come up with one if you'd like it. But essentially what you're going to do is going back to this slide here, decide which of these 5, describe the conflict. That's what you're doing first. Describe the conflict. Give me a title slide, a slide describing the conflict, and then 5 more slides talking about how each one of those conflict styles would work or would not work. So you'd have one for compromise, one for collaboration, one for avoidance, and then you'd have one more slide explaining which one works best given that context. Okay, does that make sense? All right, cool. So there's that, but 5 different ways of conflict management. Can you think of other, I don't know, instances where I talked about how avoidance helped me with my personal conflict? Can you think of other instances where one of these other techniques would help you with conflict? Like, what was a time that you used collaboration? What was a time that you actually competed with someone to resolve the conflict? And so forth.
I tried to compromise, but that didn't work well because I think the person was on a power trip pretty much, that
Yeah.
they didn't care to compromise.
Yep.
They looked down on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after 8 years, it was just like, I'm done. Tell them 9 o'clock. After 8 years, I was done.
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
8 years, I was done. I was just like, and I put so much into the job.
Mhm.
And it was 8 years. And the crazy thing about it is the person was younger than I.
Yeah.
And that was what was the frustrating thing about it. So I tried avoidance, but she kept coming at me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, after that, I was just like, you know what? I was
And
done.
sometimes you're right. Sometimes you need to switch gears. I think as a society, and I think especially as women, think about this for a second. I think especially as women, it's really, really encouraged that we compromise. We are really, really encouraged to compromise, collaborate, accommodate. One of those 3 are things that we're really, 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 that's what the expectation is for us, like as a society, culturally speaking. And so I think a lot of times, and especially too, I don't want to get too religious on this, but especially someone who's Christian, there's a lot of love everybody else, don't harm anyone else, love your neighbor where they are, that sort of thing. And these are beautiful principles, but they don't always work. And they don't always work to your advantage. And so there's this expectation that we're going to compromise or we're going to collaborate, and it just doesn't always work. Another example, I told you this a few weeks ago, where my daycare provider called me on Friday and said, today is Ami's last day of daycare and have a nice life. And I lost it, right? I lost it. Now, the reality is we had been working with this person since last September, and we were not happy with her because she's mean, and she just does not do well with parents. And in that case, we were like, we're just going to accommodate. We're just gonna, we'll deal with her little quirks and her inconsistencies, and we're gonna deal with the things that bother us because it's what's best for our child. And so I accommodated for, what is that, like 9 months, 10 months. And then she called me and said, today's Amelie's last day. You're on your own, you're stuck. Immediately, my conflict management style with her went from accommodation to competition. First thing I did was call her boss at the state. Since that, oh yeah, absolutely. I have no problem saying this. Since then, I still have to contact her a little bit because there's paperwork we need to do, and she has Amelie's clothes that I still need to pick up, stuff like that. And there's definitely a very different tone to our relationship now, because I don't need to accommodate you anymore, lady. I really don't. So that conflict has changed. Accommodation worked. The context changed. You're no longer taking care of my kid. I don't need to accommodate you anymore. And so now I'm competing with you.
Shouldn't she be accommodating for you if like they're the daycare? Like,
you would think, but like I
Like,
said,
my
yeah.
boss is the total opposite. You should you should bring your daughter to my daycare.
Thank you. We did find a summer camp for her, and she's starting preschool at Goodwin in September. So we're good, but oh my God.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason. Maybe that.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. See, now I have a great example for class. But the point is, communication and conflict management, compromise is not always the way to go. Collaboration is not always the way to go, especially when, like I said, as women, I think we're kind of pushed one way over another. So do I need to clarify which any of these are? What, like collaboration versus accommodation? Does this make sense? Competition, I want to win. I'll do anything I can to win. Collaboration, it's a win-win. Accommodation, I'm just going to put up with it to make you happy. Avoidance is pretty obvious. And then compromise, in a perfect world, sure, that's going to be the best bet. What's going to work so both of us are happy to some extent. But, all right. I'm not going to have you guys do that. Let's talk a little bit longer. Whoops. It is 8 o'clock. I'm going to do this really quick, but this is so important. I think you like this. Karens. Let's talk briefly about Karens, because this is so vital to conflicts and conflict and communication. All right. So I see the grins on your face. I think everyone's pretty familiar with what a Karen is, who a Karen is. When someone calls me a Karen, I lose it. I immediately call my sister. I'll be like, hey, am I a Karen? This is what happened, right? And I'll go through the whole thing. I need her to tell me, no, you're not a Karen, or it was kind of yucky. But 9 times out of 10, she's like, no, you're not the Karen. So this is this new meme in the past, really 10 years, middle-aged white woman perceived to behave in a racist, entitled, or angry way in public, right? And you see it all the time. It's to the point now where I think this is hysterical. My mom, for fun, will like watch Karen videos on YouTube as a way to relax. She's like, yeah, this is awesome because look at these horrible people. But this is a real thing now, is Karens. And the reality is these are not anything new. This is not a new type of person. But especially with the internet and with memes and viral videos, it's just becoming more obvious and more talked about. All right. So what creates a Karen? Couple different things. People reacting poorly to uncertainty. There's a lot of stuff going on, especially in this country right now, that is frustrating people. Examples I've given you here: pandemic, racial and civil unrest, police brutality, financial crisis. I don't know if you're paying attention to the news right now. I think I told you before, I'm a complete news junkie. If you're listening to the news right now, the same thing is happening in Indonesia, in South Africa, in Colombia, like all over the world now. Suddenly people are going through this weird civil unrest period. And it's frustrating, and people are angry and they don't know how to deal with that. And what you're seeing, especially in the United States, is people who have been entitled, people who have gotten what they've wanted for all their lives. And now they're being forced to question that and to step back and say, ooh, you know, do I deserve that or not? Am I being treated fairly or unfairly, right? And historically in this country in particular, it's white people, obviously. And white women in particular are really being called out for it right now. It can be more challenging if the person who is acting like a Karen thinks that the person who is acting against them is younger than them or has a different background or different ethnicity. And you've got this problem where we are so used to being individualistic. That's something we talked about back in chapter 2, that we want what's best for ourselves and we want our needs met first. And you've got these people who are struggling with that. You know, the fact that, you know, you don't necessarily need to get all that you have. You are not necessarily as entitled as you think you are. This was a bad one. Do you remember this one? This Amy Cooper, the Central Park Karen. I don't think this is a video. No, it's not. So a year ago, there was a man who was bird watching in Central Park. His name is Christian Cooper. There's no relation to them. A Black man who's bird watching in Central Park in New York. And he was in an area that's very common for bird watching. And this woman, Amy Cooper, came through with her dog and she didn't have the dog on the leash. And there are leash laws and she should have had on the leash. And he asked her to leash the dog. And so she called the police on him. She called the police. And if you find the video, she's going, there's a man and he's a Black man and he's harassing me and he's attacking me and I feel very threatened right now. Whereas she was the one who didn't have her dog on the leash.
You want to hear something crazy about that video, Professor, when you watch
I think
it?
you're going to say what I think you're going to say. Go for it.
She was focusing on that man so much that she didn't realize that she was hurting her own dog.
Oh yeah, she was choking the dog. She had to surrender the dog after this. She did get it back. Yep.
Like you were so focusing on trying to get that man arrested, trying to do everything, but the person that you love, you were hurting and you didn't realize that you. I'm speaking as the dog and the dog. You were hurting the dog and you realized you were hurting the dog.
And what made this particular situation especially bad is it happened within 2 hours the same day as George Floyd's murder. That's, so this was maybe, I think this was lunchtime and he was killed around 2 o'clock that afternoon. So it was the same day, and where suddenly people were, you know, outraged over George Floyd's murder, this went viral too. And she lost her job, she lost her dog, she had to make a half-hearted apology because the timing there. Yeah, go ahead, Elise.
At the end of the day, he took the high road. He was
did.
like, I don't want this woman to get in trouble. I just want her to understand what she did.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is she to understand? You know, I applaud him that he did that. But how is she to understand what she did if those outcomes didn't happen to her?
Yep.
She'll think twice next time.
Yeah, absolutely. She still lost her job over it. She got the dog back, but she lost her job. But this is an example of how Karen, that idea of Karen just gets way out of control. You're putting a man's life in danger. Police have to report to it. Police have to come and investigate this because you didn't do something, because you didn't put your dog on the leash. Horrible, horrible situation. And there are lots of other examples of Karens. There really are. Other ways to describe Karen wants to speak to the advantager. She doesn't want to vaccinate her kids. She thinks COVID-19 is a hoax, won't wear her mask, polices other people's behavior, and there's tons and tons of these. But what's happened is this has become a symbol of white supremacy. This has become an example of how people have been so entitled and so privileged for so long. And now as that's hopefully being broken down, I mean, I can't say that it is being broken down. I'm not in the middle of it myself, but hopefully it is being broken down, or at least there's more recognition for it. She's become the symbol of what you don't want to be. All right. Let me give you one more thing. Karen has been around for a long time. Emmett Till. I imagine you've heard about this story from history classes. This is famous story. 1955 in Mississippi. Emmett Till was, I believe he was 14. Do I have it there? Emmett Till was 13, 14 years old. He walked into a store where Carolyn Bryant Dunham was working. Her husband owned the store. She was 21 and something happens. No one is sure exactly what happened. She said he catcalled her. He said that he touched her or said he was going to rape her, something like that. Okay, 13-year-old boys are morons. Let's establish that. But the accusations that this woman made against this young boy, whatever happened, and no one witnessed it, were enough that her husband and her brother-in-law murdered him. They hunted him down, they murdered him, they mutilated him, and they left him for dead. And a young boy's life was ruined because this woman was upset and she made accusations. And he became famous because his mother insisted on an open casket funeral. She wanted people to see what had happened, how this woman's entitled behavior, how this racist response to it had affected her son. So famous story. Now, here's the thing that's crazy about it. We've heard so much about Emmett Till. He's become a face of the civil rights movement. Take a look at this last bullet point I have here. There we go. Carolyn Bryant Dunham is still alive. All right, think 1955, what was that? 70 years ago? So she's in her 90s now. And she's still alive, and her family has protected her identity and her whereabouts for the past 65 years, okay? She said in an interview in the past 5 years that she made it all up. She made it all up. She doesn't remember exactly what had happened. You know, maybe he was a little sassy to her, but he certainly hadn't insulted her or touched her. And she made it all up. And there was other stuff in her life, frustration with her husband, frustration living in Mississippi in 1955, whatever it was. And she had let this complaint, she had let this frustration and entitlement snowball into this horrible crime against a child. So if you think about, you know, Amy Cooper and her reaction, as silly as it is that we think about now, this is dangerous. This behavior can be dangerous. And this is people who are struggling to deal with conflict. The conflict is not necessarily with someone else. It's conflict with a social structure. It's conflict with racial injustice. It's conflict with things were the way I wanted them to be, and now suddenly they're changing. But that inability to deal with conflict, and it produces these horrible stories, or these horrible actions.
Conflict within themselves.
Say that again?
I also think conflict within themselves.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Is that what you're going to say, Courtney?
No, I was going to say people that make false claims like that should go to prison for what they accused the other person of, like for that long of time. So if it was,
Sure.
if they sentenced him, I honestly think that she should have the same thing. They murdered that man for no reason.
Right.
That little boy. But it also reminds me of James Tillman, who wrote his book.
Yeah.
About,
like, I know that. Who is that? Yeah.
About what happened to him, and it was what, 18 years later, and
21.
the woman something like that, and the woman identified him, and DNA proved that it wasn't him. Like,
I think, isn't there a similar story with was it a basketball player, a football player? He ended up serving time in jail, and then she later on recanted and said that that wasn't true.
I'm sure.
I don't have it here. Let me find it for you. So for some context here.
Sorry, Court, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
you're
totally
fine.
But I'm just saying, like, if you make a false accusation like that, you should automatically go to prison for, I don't know whether it be the sentence they would have gotten if they were convicted or something, because that's somebody's life. Nobody's ever going to look at him the same, whether you recant your statement or not. No one will ever look at that person
Absolutely.
the same way again. Like Tanya Harding, she will always be the one that took out Nancy Kerrigan to me. Always. I don't care if she has a job on True Network or whatever network she's on.
Is
I
she
don't
really?
care. Yeah, she's like a commentator for some show that posts little videos or whatever, but
Little funny videos about people and stuff. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And she will always be the woman that attacked Nancy Kerrigan to me. Always. Even though they have it on tape, like they know she did it, but that's like,
So
but it's
here's
crazy.
the context. James Tillman is who Courtney just mentioned. He's a Goodwin student. So he's someone local to us and and in our community. Nicest, really nice guy. In 1988, he was convicted of sexual assault and kidnapping. And at that point, I don't remember how old he was at that point. He was not that old. 26.
Oh, yeah,
He was in his early 20s himself. He was
Yeah.
really, really young. But essentially, it says served 17 years, but what they're not talking about there is the 2.5 years before he went to trial. So it really comes up to 21 years when you do the math. But essentially, he was accused of a woman in Hartford, a white woman, she was a nurse, of raping her and kidnapping her. And he went to prison and he served time. And ultimately, this website, the Innocence Project, goes back and does exactly that. They do that DNA work to try to exonerate people who have been essentially put away for crimes that they didn't commit. This is a clear example of someone who, I don't want to call this woman a Karen necessarily, because she was raped, she was attacked. But you also have to consider the fact that in that moment, in that attack, what's going through your head? Do you remember? Do you shut down? How do you protect yourself? You know, do you put someone else's head on the body of the person who's attacking you? Besides the fact that police sketch artists are imperfect, and memory after trauma or post-traumatic stress, that's all going to be noise and imperfect when it comes to convicting someone. But exactly that. This is another instance where you've got someone who is entitled and her story was believed over his story. And, you know, if you talk to James himself, he'll say, I was a kid. I didn't know how to defend myself. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I had gotten in trouble. I'd gotten into, you know, he'd had a few petty larcenies beforehand. So it worked against him. But it's a great example, Courtney. Absolutely. Another example of how Karens really can cause a lot of damage. And again, I'm saying Karens in this case, it doesn't have to be a Karen per se. Here's an interesting slide. And this is the last we'll talk about with the Karen phenomenon. It's really indicative about problems in society. The fact that Karen is suddenly, and again, she's always existed. She's just had different names. She's looked differently. But the fact that now she's suddenly garnering so much more attention is really indicative of about a lot of the problems in our society. They're coming to light. People are paying more attention to them. And it also talks about how we deal with conflict. There are groups of people in this country who haven't had to deal with conflict. They have just used their race or their power or their privilege so that they didn't have to deal with conflict. And there are people out there, and that's something that they just cannot deal with now. They're fighting that. So at the very least, the Karen meme, it can be funny, it can be obnoxious. I don't want people to call me that because it makes me upset, but there is benefit in the sense that people are now more aware of, here's this weird, entitled, privileged person who is used to throwing their weight around, but hasn't considered, you know, the consequences of their actions per se. Go ahead,
Make a
Elise.
comment, Professor Sweeter.
Please.
Like, please don't, you know, when you talk about this stuff, it's like really trying to put it in a way where you don't offend anybody.
Absolutely.
But like you said, Karen has been around for years. But this is the problem. It, like you said, it's being put to light more.
Yeah.
But white women, this is one of the things that they use because they are white women.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I've watched an older woman say that over a video, of her Karen video. She says, "I'm white. I'm this, and I
Yeah.
could get away with this." And I looked at, and it was one of the comments that was made for back in the days, because white women use their whiteness to kind of like portray that I'm the victim. Poor me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you think about movies, particularly older movies. Think about the heroine. I can't say it. the female lead, like she's white, she's slender, she's got long blonde hair, and she's got very, very fair skin, and she's almost childlike, right? That even in itself, first of all, it's a stereotype about innocence and privilege, and someone who should be just like praised and protected. But these are also people who can do just the most damage, and it's not accurate. So it's interesting how King Kong is coming to mind, as random as that is. The woman that Kong goes after is this blonde nymph-like creature. And there's such a stereotype between that is, that's the ideal, that's the perfect woman.
I don't know if anyone has seen this video. Is this young girl? I can literally say she's 14, 15 tops. You have to see her. And when I watched the video, I was like, oh my God, I fear for that young child. And the reason why I said I fear for her, she was arguing with her parents in regards to racism. She was bluntly calling out, telling her parents, "You guys are racist." The comments they were making, and she had her strong views. And I said to myself, oh my God, like everybody applaud her and whatever. The first thing that came to my head is like the friction that is going to cause between her.
Oh yeah.
Like they may see her differently because she doesn't support their views. And my concern was her safety. Like, how would these, like, you love your children unconditionally, but if you are that strong and you are that racist and your blood doesn't see it that way, like, what happens to that child at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, you're talking about like family conflict and conflict over generations. People need to have these conversations. They need to talk about this stuff. I mean, my grandmother is 91 years old. She can be pretty damn racist. And I recognize that as a little kid. She'd say things I'd be like, whoa, and that's the conversation that people need to have. Let me go really quick to this week's discussion board, because I have a feeling that this week's discussion board is talking about just that. Nope, how to tell if someone is lying to you. So it's not this one. There is one coming up in a few weeks that is going to talk about just this, about how we do need to have these conversations, and we do need to discuss, how some people are entitled and some people are privileged and other people don't have those same things, and dealing with that conflict. So I think you'll see that, maybe the family one. I'm not sure exactly which one, but it is coming up. All right. Any final thoughts about the Karen thing? It's 8:20 and I know you guys are tired. Any final thoughts there? I just want to show you really quick on this slide. San Francisco is actually, hold on, sweetheart. San Francisco is actually voting on something called the Karen Acts. That's what they've named it. And they did that on purpose. And essentially they are trying to make 911 calls that are racially charged, like Amy Cooper, this lady here, but calls where it's obvious that someone is making a call because it's a racist conflict. They're trying to make that illegal and actually punishable by fines. So just something to think about. I thought it was really interesting. Caution against racially exploitative non-emergencies, the Karen Act.
I I think that's a great idea because
Yeah.
maybe then now they'll think before they make those kind of calls.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I am going to wrap it up here. Let me just look really quickly at Blackboard and make sure we're not missing anything. Couple things that you can expect from me. First of all, I'm going to send you that survey with some ideas about what we'd like to do for the final. My goal is that we have a decision on the final by next week so that we can start working on it. I'm also going to send you 2 videos. I'll send you first the Tangled thing that I was talking about before, so you can see Mother Gothel gaslighting Rapunzel in action. And I'm also going to send you, I don't think I have it up here open right now. I have to check. Hold on, sweetheart. There's a really cool video that I found, here it is, a couple months ago, and I didn't share it with you tonight. It's not coming up now. I didn't share with you tonight because it is 20 minutes long, but it is talking about the history of Karens and giving you a little bit more context. Yes, honey, I see that. You need to be quiet for a second. Sorry. But a little bit more context about who Karen is and why she can be so dangerous. All right. Anything else before we take it easy for tonight? Awesome. I want to say thank you for your help with the final. It was really valuable. It was really, really valuable to me. And I hope that we're going to be able to turn this final project into something that's much more interesting and enjoyable and less overwhelming for you. So look for that email. And again, when we talk about conflicts, this is a tough one. And obviously we brought in some really tough subjects here when we talk about gaslighting and when we talk about racial injustice and Karens. So if you feel uncomfortable by this, if you want to talk more about it, privately, let me know. All right. Shoot me a text message. We can talk about it some more. But I think it's something that's really, really interesting because you think about how incidents like Amy Cooper and other Karen incidents and problems just across country really have to do with communication and that breakdown of communication. So food for thought.
I think you have such a diverse class. I think we all are we are from different cultures. And I think like that's something that we all like are okay to talk about because it could happen to us.
I think it's good for us.
And I think it could happen to us in different ways. Like we are different in different ways culturally,
Absolutely.
There's a banana. There's a banana.
Yes, there's a banana. All right. With that, we're done. Oh, you know what? Let me